Captain, the ship is sinking. Captain, these seas are rough. Shall we abandon ship?
Nope.
Or shall we stay on it?
Stay on the ship.
Yeah, how many? Hey, how's it going, man? Listen, hey everybody, how are we doing? Welcome to another episode of The Living Room. That was just me just warming up my vocal chops and probably an apt song for actually the conversation we can have later on today. But look, welcome to everybody. If this is your first time here, you're here in The Living Room with myself, Andre, and Philip. Now, normally we would have Mark here, but Mr. Corbin has some other stuff he needs to take care of, so he's unable to be with us today. So me and Philip, your favorites anyway, so that's good. So so welcome. So hit share, pass it on to everybody in your network that you know, so that they can come in and have a good conversation with us. Welcome. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Sunday so far, and hope you had a good weekend. Hope you're looking forward to the week and all that kind of stuff. So welcome and thank you for joining us. How are you doing, Phil?
I'm doing all right, man. Yeah, feeling okay.
So you're fully recovered now. I see the outpouring of love all last week and all during the week. You felt the love?
Yeah, it was like
a outpouring of love for your COVID recovery.
Huh? A warm hug. Although I'm not hugging, I've gone back to that. I think I went a bit rogue and wild. You know,
meaning what? You were actually hugging people?
I started hugging, and as much as I hug, I started doing that. So I've stopped that again.
No, this was a good period because, you know me, I ain't really the hugger and all that kind of thing. So I kind of I was cool with the fist bumps and I still cool with them today. So now there's a reason now, so I could tell everybody, listen, let me just cool it. How you doing? So nothing new for people that know me. So I was never big on the hugging thing. So I go, hey, look, he there, look. Look, he gutted. Oh, can't make it today. Oh, sorry there, buddy. We gutted you can't make it today too. Yeah. But it's all right. You'll be listening, and we know you'll be listening. So what else you get to this week, Phil?
Yeah, well, was work as usual. I'm trying to think what was my highlight. Well, one of the things that I drank yesterday was something called a Tumeric Latte with coconut milk. I didn't make it, but I will from now on. I just got it from a barista. It was just one of the options, and I tried it, and I thought, this is really good.
Right.
So just
a turmeric what? Latte,
yeah. So essentially turmeric and coconut milk.
Well, turmeric is becoming one of them semi-superfoods recently, you know. It's always been there, but nowadays everything is turmeric.
It's always just being in the shadow of ginger.
Yeah.
Like ginger's...
Or is it that we getting old now, so we in that age bracket, we can start hearing about turmeric. Young people probably don't hear about turmeric, but as you get certain years, people tell you need to take some turmeric.
You need some turmeric in your life right now, right this moment.
I got a feeling that might be it. Hey, Jennifer, I got a feeling that might be it. I feel people say you need turmeric, so maybe it's a thing. The young people never hear about it, but we think about it now. Yeah. Okay, so that's
maybe next thing I have a ginseng latte.
I think that's what you're coming to know. So this turmeric thing was good then.
It was really good, yeah. But it tastes like something we could make. You know, just get some coconut milk, add in the turmeric, a bit of cinnamon, a bit of bay leaf. I could taste the bay leaf in it as well.
Right.
But I was happy with it. It was a good alternative to having a coffee.
Hey, Bernadette. Okay, that sounds interesting. Extra hot. I usually go extra hot with these things because I can't really take the.
It was hot enough.
Hot enough. Okay. Yeah. Hey, Carla. It's going to be yes. Arguing it was a fad. Yeah, don't know. Might be. You never know. But I was taking some too, but I haven't really. I can't take to the taste. The little aftertaste is kind of deep. I don't really dig the
fresh root turmeric.
Man, I know people that's just take a spoonful, 2 drops of water, and down this thing like a shot and thing, and I like,
wow,
I ain't doing that. I ain't there yet. Give me a few more years, and then I ain't got no choice. Give me a few more years, and then I would see how that day goes. Okay, so that song interesting.
You sound like a negotiator, man.
Yeah, I holding on.
Hold it on. By then, the right technology will come along.
Yeah, I holding on because it almost seems like if I go too strong on the turmeric, there's a acceptance or something, right? Or that's me giving in to go on the other side.
Giving your body a chance to develop its own ways.
I see. I like your phraseology. Of course, I like that. That's what I do.
On resilience.
So since you recover, you had a run yet?
I have not tried. I've just been walking.
So
I've
you
tried.
still feeling a bit tired?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So the
honest,
tiredness thing. Okay. So you say you tried, but you don't make it?
I tried and felt unwell by running. So I have decided to just walk for the time being.
In what way? Respiratory or just feeling tired or a headache?
Tired and respiratory as well. Yeah. But not like heaving, because as soon as I felt as though, because normally if I start for a run, I'd be good.
You'd be good after a few minutes when you get adjusted, yeah.
Yeah, I just felt very this strange complete body fatigue as soon as I try to run, or even if I go for a short run as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I know it's just good to let people understand this thing real, right? And the after effects of it as well. Once you had it is definitely a real thing, because sometimes you can read about all these things, but until you can relate to someone who haven't gone through it, you could think, this thing is nothing, man. And this unfortunately, there's still a lot of people out there that think so. Hey, Karen.
It's still important to understand what's causing that long after effect. Is it just the body is tired from fighting, or is it that your internals are a little bit damaged and need to be repaired?
True. Yeah. I guess
Or is it just that the body's being reset? I don't know if I mentioned the last time someone was telling me that some of the things that your body does, like losing your taste and smell, is actually the body shutting down stuff. So it's actually the body's response and not just the virus attacking. I don't know how true that is. I've seen some speculation about it. But what they say is the loss of taste and smell is actually your body's defense.
Okay.
To stop the virus from...
So things getting redirected.
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. I guess you get more research and stuff come out on that there.
See what that is.
That is interesting. I still here trying to, after a few years here now, I've never really felt this whole sad thing at this time of year. Usually I cool with the seasons. I like the seasons, bit of adventure and thing, but...
What does it mean again? Seasonal something?
I don't even know. I just know this call it sad.
It's sad, yeah.
But this is the first time that I ever feel like, as 3:30, 4 o'clock hit, you just feel like, I'm done with that.
Yeah. Dreadful. It is dreadful.
Yeah. But normally I would be cool. I like the seasons, all that.
Turn on the lights. Stuff. Yeah.
Ain't no problem. Everything good, I like that kind of stuff. Well. But interesting to see how it affecting this year. But we get there.
It's strange. I mean, even sometimes when you have these later starts, it's nice that, okay, if you leave home, 8 o'clock, it's still kind of, you're still welcome in the dawn. Mm-hmm. But this year it's not. Not even that feels like a romantic moment, so to speak.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Interesting is, remember it's Sunday as well. Sunday as well. Yeah. I admit myself, my poppy is right there and I forget to put it on, but I did have it there as well. But it's important to remember seasonal affective disorder. There you go. Thank you, KG. That's what it is. It's important to remember, during the wars and different conflicts around the world, Caribbean people have been impacted and lost their life and give their lives in service as well. So, to anyone who has served, thank you for your service, and family members as well. Thank you for, the service your family members have given as well. Yeah. So it's important to always remember that, because when you're here, sometimes we could get lost in the conversation that's happening, but we always got to remember to put ourselves back in the conversation because we were there, and what's not. Yeah. And of course, the big thing this week, or the last couple of weeks, has been COP26. And that's why we're here today, guys. We're going to talk climate change and how it affects the Caribbean, crisis in the Caribbean. Is there a crisis, or these things actually just...
We'll find out.
Seasonal? We can just have a good conversation about that. And we got Christine from Guyana, Kwame, Beige in Jamaica, and Derval, who's a Trini in Guyana as well.
Oh, there's a full regional mix-up.
Everybody all over the place. And we're going to let them introduce themselves, and they're going to tell you the part they play in the whole climate conversation. But we just thought it's important for us to just have that conversation while these things are going on. Because I ain't really too sure you feel connected to the conversation. I mean, when you're here in the UK, you got no choice because they're all over the BBC and all over everything. But beyond,
I feel like a bystander and a listener, and
you think so?
passively react and making lifestyle changes. But
Interesting.
I need to be a lot more engaged.
Yeah, because beyond people all over the internet talking about Prime Minister Motley's speech and all the other speeches from the people from the Caribbean, leaders of the Caribbean, I don't think I really hear much activity of the region themselves talking about the topic itself. So it's interesting. So, except when the sarcasm CV come in, then we talk enough about it when it actually impacts us in an instant.
But anyway, tangible impact, yeah.
Indeed. So we're gonna have that conversation. So guys, hit share. Bring in your friends, tag your friends, whoever they are, wherever they are, because we want as many people part of this conversation as possible. So do us a favor, hit share, tag a few friends, tag 10, 15 friends if you want, and let them come into this conversation, because I feel this can be a good conversation that we're going to have today. So without any further ado, let's bring in Christine, Kwame, and Deval. Hey, guys.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good. Ooh, the Guyana flag there in the back. I see. Christine, make sure she get that in there.
Well done. That wasn't there yesterday.
No, that was intentional.
No, that is good. I like it. Beige in Jamaica. I don't see your beige or Jamaica flag behind you. I don't know.
I had too many flags to put up, so I decided.
Because as far as I know, Kwame isn't even proper. He started Beijing.
Kwame the master was gonna say you're on proper Beijing. Lord,
boy,
he insulting you.
I'm a Caribbean man. I'm a Caribbean man.
The guy want to insult you, man. And hey, Deval, how you doing?
Hello.
I'm good, thanks. Excited to be here.
Excellent. But look, you heard our little preamble at the beginning. The climate conversation. Christine, let's start with you. Is there a crisis for the Caribbean? Let's start there.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for inviting me to discuss with you on a part of the living room. Short answer, yes, there is a crisis. We're living in the Caribbean. We're part of the small island and developing country. So we see this firsthand in tropical storms, in sea level rise, in the droughts and floods. So yes, short answer, there is a crisis and we should all be concerned.
Okay. Interesting. Deval, yourself?
Well, I fully endorse what Christine said in terms of, many years ago, climate change used to be, a far off event. But today we are living through the impacts. We're seeing climate impacts escalating. So we're definitely in a crisis and we certainly need to act on it.
Interesting.
Definitely in a crisis.
But what's the crisis though, Kwame? What we actually seeing?
Yes,
we could say so, but what we actually seeing in real life? What's the crisis?
Yeah. So what Deval would have noted, I remember when it first started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me again. I remember when it first started off, as she would have stated, we were talking about climate change, but people didn't really relate to it, and that was about 20 years ago, I would say. Now, with they're saying about 1.1 degree shift in average global temperatures, we have been seeing a lot going on. For example, we saw how Ivan destroyed Grenada. There was another hurricane within the last 2 or 3 years that destroyed Dominica, or a little bit more than that. Barbados was obviously significantly impacted as well. So we've been seeing the hurricanes, massive destruction. We've also been seeing droughts impacting food security, which is obviously a massive concern. And then I guess a more long-term impact will be the sea level rise, which clearly we are a small island and Guyana is actually below sea level. So I think this is another area that we're going to have to look out for, not immediately, but coming on short. I think the other crisis is the crisis of governance. So we're seeing all of these things happening, but at COP, we did not see the political that sector respond adequately. And I think that is also where I think the crisis is as well. So we're seeing the actual manifestation of climate change, but then the response and what we need to do to get it to 1.5. I think we basically at 2.3 now based on what has happened over the last 2 weeks. I think that is where the crisis is, getting that deficit down.
So it's interesting you said when you started this 20 years ago, and looking at Christine and Derval, I can see a bit of an age difference.
don't bring that up.
The guy right there for you. Okay.
Between them and us. Right?
Collective.
But what I'm wondering is, do you think there's also a sort of division in energy between, and when I talk about energy, I'm talking about the way people are engaged with this topic of climate change between younger people and those who are older. So, for example, Kwame, you said you started 20 years ago. We'll come back to you. I'd like to hear from Christine and Derval what their perspectives are, but also like to hear if you think your energy and engagement has sort of changed over time.
Either one, Christine.
Yes, so I think I have been a part of this movement. I might look young, but I feel like I've been a part of this movement for a really long time.
All right.
So if we're measuring climate activism in terms of age, I probably like middle age myself.
Okay.
But what I can say is the young generation, or my generation, I should say, we understand that this is the issue of our generation. This is the time that we have to like speak up and fight, because we're seeing the effects of climate change. And another thing that I realize is the connection of the climate issues with all other issues and all other social justice issues that young people continue, like historically, to stand up and fight against. And we know that all these social movements, young voices are always at the forefront. And so I think a lot of the actions that we saw this in the streets of Glasgow, we saw young people in the streets just, shouting, asking for what they want, because they realize the tragedy of what we have right now, what we're expected if changes doesn't happen. We know the future that we have or wouldn't have.
Okay. Yes. What about you, Derval? What do you think about that?
Well, certainly we're seeing the younger generation being a lot more active in terms of climate activism. And I've observed the difference between the different generations. For example, I would be considered a millennial, but Gen Z, I must say Gen Z has
So let me show my age now. Who is Gen Z?
So they would
As a
be
person, Gen Z?
the current crop of young people. So even Greta Thunberg, they would fall in that category.
Oh, born in this millennium, in this thing.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's like 26 years and younger.
Got
right?
26 and younger. Okay, got it.
So I think they recognize the wounded planet that they are inheriting. And they have really, I would say they are much more proactive, much more radical, and much more demanding, as they should be, in terms of getting us to act now. Whereas older generations, let's say baby boomers or Gen X, I think it appears as if they are taking more of a too relaxed approach to something that is so urgent. And I think it's more urgent for the upcoming generation. So therefore, you see the disparity in terms of passion and even, I guess, the aggressive nature that we want to tackle this crisis.
What got you involved in what was it that sparked for you that said, I need to get involved in it?
I try to think of a defining moment, but I think it was a journey. It was a natural progression that got me into the climate space. I studied environmental management for my undergrad. So I've always had an interest in environment, and I've worked in the environmental risk management space, and particularly in the energy sector. So there I was exposed to the impacts of climate change and the need to adjust the way that we operate our systems. And for me, from I guess, a concerned citizen standpoint, I recognize that although the Caribbean was considered a very vulnerable region, we weren't really having the conversations I felt that we needed to have. And I also recognize the way that climate change really intersects every sector. So it's not an issue for the environmentalists, which I would consider myself, but it's everyone's issue. It affects us all. So I guess my passion for climate change really ignited over the past couple of years, and myself becoming more aware of the impacts that are taking place and recognizing that the lack of action, I would say, at all levels, and wanting to make a contribution in that regard.
Lack of action.
I thought so. This is interesting. So let me get straight into it. We're in the living room, right? It's just us. Have a drink. Let me take a drink of water here. Well, white might be water.
Yeah.
So recently, Prime Minister Mia Mottley would have spoken at COP26, and everyone, and rightfully so, would have given lots of kudos and what's not to the speech. And I think for me, it was the bravery in how she spoke, and she was very direct, and she didn't really just criticize, but she also suggested solutions for which many people really couldn't argue against, really, from when I looked, for people in the audience. But then there's the other side to say, okay, I agree with you what you're saying there, but then let's bring it home now. Do you think if you're talking top down first, and before we get to the people, policies that are being instituted across the region, are we saying, talking out both sides of our mouth in a sense with this thing and playing a little bit of, I don't know, Russian roulette with the climate? Because on the one hand, you have that conversation. On the other hand, in Antigua, in Barbados, in Jamaica, Trinidad, all over the Caribbean, we still put in hotels right up against the beach, which is a natural defenses from the effects of climate change. Some of the issues with the reefs, yes, is climate change, but some of it is the way how we allow our tourism product to operate as well. So, are we playing, we double dipping in this conversation?
You want me to take
you go, Kwame. You itching?
Yeah. So Prime Minister Motley, as usual, was stellar in her presentation. But as it relates to the Caribbean, I think there is a disconnect. I think one major issue is that obviously tourism. I think Prime Minister Motley mentioned 50% of our income, possibly more. I mean, there's direct and indirect relations come from tourism. All right. So we have that. Yes, we have to make our money from tourism, but in making money from tourism, there will be some trade-offs in terms of the environment. Although tourism depends on the environment. So yes, is it really I don't know. It's a tricky issue. I think we do a little bit of greenwashing in terms of, yes, we want the environment protected, but yet we want the bums in the bed, because that is the indicator for tourism. How many bums we can get in the bed and how much money we can get from those bums.
What do you mean by greenwashing, Kwame? Was that?
Okay, well, the exact definition, people can easily Google that, but it's basically when you just market something to be environmentally friendly when it really isn't. And so you can see this from just the basic marketer, communication person trying to develop an ad for some product. Clearly that marketer or communication person is not trained in the environment, but they see something in the product that they can dive off with and say, well, this is the greenest thing since sliced bread. So that is one aspect. Another aspect, I don't know if this is under the greenwashing banner, but I'll give you another example which I think should be taken into consideration. You have a hotel that Andre said clears off a wetland and then applies for Green Globe certification and gets it. So those are some of the broader issues we need to get at in terms of greenwashing. But then the final thing is, so we're depending on tourism 50%. But then we are in small islands. So where are we going to put the hotels? I mean, it's not that we have land like Guyana or Belize or wherever, in Barbados, maybe in Jamaica, and we have to put the tourism facility in a space that the tourists will want to come. So we got protected by the sea. So it's an interesting dilemma we are in now. We have to change our tourism model. We have to divest out of tourism. So I think maybe 50% of our income from tourism, we have to move from that. I think
it's too high.
Yeah, or we have to change up the model so it's more malleable to what we want to do in terms of a long-term trajectory as it relates to sustainable development.
Okay.
But yeah.
Christine, you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I guess in Guyana, we are now embarking on our tourism sector for the long, Guyana is not the place to come if you're looking for blue water and, the regular Caribbean tourism. That's not what you find in Guyana. Like we have
adventure.
Forests. Yeah, we have adventure, we have big animals and things like that. So our issue isn't so much the tourism sector, but so much so our embarkment into an industry that's dying, which is the oil and gas industry. So I think
Tell me about that.
Politicians will be politicians and they'll go up on stage and say the things that they need to say. However, on the other hand, small islands and small countries like Guyana, we have been left out of the climate conversation for many, many decades. And we know these issues are all issues that tie back into colonization. And so now we're trying to develop, but also we're trying to be green and we're trying to follow the green path. And we are, as in the Guyana case, we now have this oil revenue, and our government wants to say that, well, this is the thing that's going to aid us in development. And for most Guyanese, the question is, what really is development if this is going to be something that's going to be impacting our generations to come? And knowing that we are low-lying, we depend on our seawalls and sea defense for protection. And even this year, we've seen the effects of extreme flooding. So the conversation is definitely timely and is definitely not one that we're going to have like one at the end of this call. We're not going to have a solution to give to a politician. It's something that we kind of have to continue to dive deep in and continue to like dissect and talk and discuss.
And
so you said by the end of this call, we're not going to have a solution? What are we here for?
Exactly. We're in the living room. Yeah. He's got solutions in the living room, right?
It's called the decade of decision. So apparently we have some time.
You got some time. How many people did Guyana have at COP this year? You had a big contingent, one of the biggest in the region, didn't you?
Yes, for the first time ever, I think. We had a number of persons, and our president was there. He gave a number of speeches. And also what we had a couple of indigenous leaders. So they were actually joining the Amazon Pact and speaking out on their traditional wisdom and like why it's important. So yeah, we kind of had two sides of the coin right there. We had the political side. We also had the human rights activist that was there to making sure that the global community was here on the other side of the conversation on what really we need to do as citizens in Guyana.
But how is that message being translated in Guyana then? Oh, we got a bit of feedback. How is that being translated in Guyana? The climate change conversation, but then but we drilling for oil, because the whole conversation at COP was to move away from fossil fuels. But Guyana is saying, hey, and Barbados too, because I think we're trying to in the southern thing, we're trying to look for some oil as well. How is that conversation being engaged with the people?
Yeah, what I can say is during this week, we actually had one of the public engagement for one of the yellowtail, one of the well that ExxonMobil is trying to drill. And the activists, they rightfully said, like right now we have COP happening. And here we are discussing this possible development. And we are concerned that, for example, there isn't strong insurance. Like, can you tell us about your insurance? Like, if something is to happen, how are we paying for this? So things like that was happening. So I think the majority of Guyanese, if you ask them on the streets, they are very concerned because 90% of Guyanese live on the coast. And we have a number of fisher folks. So we know that if something is to happen, and with oil development, something will happen. It's just a matter of when it'll happen. They depend on this resource. And so if you ask them, the regular person on the street, they are very concerned. And I think it's more so the government and the government figures that are pushing this development as something that will bring wealth to our nation, because Guyana has experienced a number of the extractive industry is not something new to Guyana, so to speak, oil and gas. But we as citizens, we are very concerned with where exactly the wealth goes and how who benefits, because we have a number of impoverished community here and a number of persons that continue to be left out of the development that they speak of.
It is a very interesting one. I was listening to a podcast recently where they were saying, there are actually enough fossil fuel reserves that we could stop drilling, stop getting oil, and we have enough till 2060 for global consumption, which is interesting. But the other thing is, this particular person, I can't remember the name of the person who was speaking, but what they also identified was that there's a lot of policy around emissions and controlling emissions. But like up to 2015, 2016, there wasn't any real policy in place around fossil fuel extraction. To the point that there wasn't even a register of who owned the fossil fuels reserves. A lot of that stuff is it's just not documented. It happens in a very unregulated manner. Which is quite surprising. And it's interesting now Guyana is coming into this time when suddenly the eyes are there, and there's probably going to be a lot of regulation that suddenly comes at it, which feels a little bit disadvantageous.
Yeah, I guess one major issue, especially in developing countries, is regulation. So yeah, that will be an interesting space. I mean, does the Guyanese government have the capacity to, but even from before, just negotiating with some of these large oil companies? So clearly, they're probably getting the better end of the stick, and then now regulating their environmental protocols, being able to go out there and take samples or whatever. So yeah, regulation will always be a major issue in spaces like developing countries where resources are constrained. Resources are constrained. But
Christine, go ahead.
No, but I just want to highlight, Guyana is really at an interesting crossroads, because I mean, as you know, in terms of economic development, Guyana has been could have been doing more, and then now they've landed on this oil, albeit a dirty form of development, at the time when we should not even be looking at that. I mean, technically, we should not be investing in any oil moving forward from today. It doesn't make sense if we have to phase it out. But as I think, phase it out as opposed to phase down. Right. But as Philip mentioned, in terms of vilifying countries like China and India, the reason we are where we are is because those developed countries like US and Germany and so on would have profited in this, what you call industrial time, and made their riches, similar to slavery and so on. They made their riches, and now it is wrong to do it. And they're saying, well, you can't do that. But that's why India and China are saying, well, you can't tell me that, because you got rich while doing it. I'm still at the stage where I want to be rich. And this is it is interesting. They may say it is a cheap form of energy, but is it really? If you take the full environmental evaluation of it, it is really not. It's probably the most expensive because it is killing us slowly. But interesting time. And then Trinidad as well. Trinidad, I think, is ranked in the top 10 or top 20 in terms of per capita carbon emitter in the world. So Trinidad is also an issue we have to try and conquer. But oil is money. Oil is money.
It's a catch-22. It's a catch-22, especially for us small island developing states, as we pursue development alongside climate ambitions. And I think this whole conversation highlights something that I think climate change itself exacerbates in terms of inequalities. So coming back to that conversation about even Guyana or India and China, the developing world, trying to achieve, a standard of living for their population that the developed world has already achieved, utilizing the systems that are now bad. How do we treat with that? Because we can't tell the developing world, and is it that we're saying that you are not allowed to achieve this level of development? And so therefore it's very tricky. There's no straightforward answer. Even looking at the outcome of COP26, we see how challenging this crisis is to address. And particularly in the region, given our vulnerabilities, given our small size, our geographic location, our fragile economies, the debt burden. There's so many factors that we have to consider. Our dependence on climate sensitive sectors like agriculture, tourism. It's a challenge.
To pick up on something you said, Deval, and to throw something completely different into the conversation. When it comes to development, is it possible that some aspects of the climate change issue could be being exacerbated to prevent some people from developing?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. And I know Christine mentioned, our legacy of colonialism. But I think if we're discussing the concept of development, it's important that we define what we mean by development, as opposed to just importing a model of development that doesn't fit
Walter Rodney
there,
right?
Yeah. So I think that is one of the things that the region grapples with in terms of that model of development that we've been pursuing that has left us in a very vulnerable position. So going forward, are we going to continue along that road, along that path, filled with so much uncertainty and so much risk, or are we going to re-strategize, and determine a new paradigm for development of the Caribbean region? And I think that is a key strategy for us in terms of building resilience to climate change. So our development, one, must be sustainable, and two, it must be climate resilient. And then the third level of that will be climate prosperity. But it's a process to get there.
That sounds good. No, that's it's interesting now. Kwame mentioned slavery and almost likened our dependence on oil to that of slavery back in the day. And there's an argument that slavery wasn't stopped because people decided this is morally wrong. It just was no longer viable
economically
as an economic way of getting stuff done, of manufacturing and development. Do we need something like that to happen, that suddenly oil and fossil fuels and actually living lives that are destroying the environment and the climate and putting us at risk, that suddenly our definition of what is viable has to change?
For that to happen, you got to turn off the internet all across the Caribbean, because once we can see how other people living, we want to live so too. So there's a way that you got to have that conversation, because you're right, Philip. But and this is why I was asking earlier, the disconnect between the climate conversation, development, and what needs to be done. Deval is right. We need to almost come up with our own model of development that is sustainable, and climate prosperity might get you
and deserving, and that we like and love,
and that we like and love, and that you feel and that you develop, because you gotta feel as if you developing too. Because when you looking and all the things coming through the television, the internet, all this kind of stuff, if you think like you're being held back while the rest of the world is moving forward, or you feel like you're regressing from where you are, then that's a hard conversation to have, and the leaders must really look beyond the 5-year cycle of elections to have that conversation, because he who dares to put something in place to do that, they know they're probably going to lose the election straight away. But it needs to be a path that is beyond 5 years, beyond 10 years, and dare to put the country on that trajectory.
Yes, and Philip made a point about the end of slavery, and I think something similar is happening with fossil fuels, in that they will not be phased out or phased down because there are no more reserves, but it's because it's becoming unattractive, or it has become unattractive on the global scale, and in terms of the carbon tax associated with the fossil fuel industry. So the region has to look at what's happening on the global scale, and how it will impact us locally. And when we have a regional territory that is now getting into that sector and investing resources, and I guess banking their development on this resource that you know they may end up with stranded assets, or in a few years, who knows what the market price would be,
Yeah,
given
yeah,
the change in policies.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think the just jumping in there, I think once the global economic model starts to recognize the true cost, the true environmental cost. Because as I said, right now when you buy something, you're not really paying the true cost for that thing, because you probably pay people cheap labor, forced labor, and then they mine and cut down trees that you never even have to consider in the cost. So I think once we start recognizing the true cost of things, I think that would flip a lot of things around, and you will see the financial incentives. The one pet peeve I have, and I don't see it highlighted in the discussion, and I'm segueing. Feel free to pull me back in. Is that the
depends on where you go, but go ahead.
We're talking climate today.
Not the cookies. But what for the renewable strategy is dependent on mining of minerals. So you see, for example, we're doing deep sea mining in the Pacific. They're doing, it's actually called green minerals, I think, in Africa, the DRC. But we're actually destroying ecosystems right now to get metals and so on, to build batteries and do all of these fancy renewable things, and nobody's talking about that. So, and if we're going to net zero, where we're putting up all of these fancy things, where are the inputs coming? Let's shine the light on. I mean, clearly we're going this way, and this is a pet peeve of mine, because the thing has hit the fan so much that we have to push technology a lot now to make back up. So it's technology that create the problem, and now we're using technology to try and fix the problem. Fine, maybe we're too far ahead to use the natural processes because we don't want to, because we're cutting down the Amazon and so on already. So if we're going to use technology to solve the problem, let's start looking at what is required for us to get the technology. And I think we also need to shine a little light on that as well, because there's a lot of technology we're going to need.
Yeah, but go ahead, Phil.
No, I was saying in terms of technology, I was wondering, there could be, I know we're not creating solutions, but there might be two things that I just wonder how useful and how viable these are. Things like carbon capture technologies, one, actually capturing carbon that's destroying the climate, and then the other is ozone restoration technologies. Are these things that we in the Caribbean should be looking at if we want to go into fossil fuel extraction and so on? Should we be saying, okay, if we're going to go into that industry, let's create it in a way that we can actually minimize the impact by having these sort of core systems running at the same time?
I'll let one of the ladies go first.
Yeah, in response to Philip's point, there has been a lot of talk around net zero, and it's very controversial in
What
terms
is
of
net zero? Explain
what
net zero.
exactly.
What exactly was net zero? Because the more I hear it, the more I getting confused, or the more to me it don't make no sense. But
Right.
explain it to me, Devan.
So when we're looking at emissions, we know that the fossil fuel industry is responsible for a significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions. So
Yeah.
net zero looks at balancing that equation in terms of the emissions that you put out. You engage in some mechanism to offset that. So
Yes. That's
so
what I
that
was
you
trying to.
can, yeah, you can offset the emissions that you put out. But the
Mm-hmm.
other side of the argument is that we need to reduce emissions from the source as opposed to investing, significant resources and technology to balance those emissions that you put out from the start. So there's one school of thought that we should be focusing more on reducing emissions, improving efficiency,
Yeah.
and ensuring that we engage in responsible production and consumption, the responsible use of resources, as opposed to the other side of it, particularly, the fossil fuel industry, who want to continue, their business, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. You know, they are proposing new technologies, carbon capture, carbon storage, and these all have their place because our energy system will include a level of fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. However, our focus really should be on developing, or I think changing our energy systems so that they move away from the dependence, the sole reliance on fossil fuels, because we are fully aware of the impact it has in terms of emissions, in terms of environmental degradation, and particularly in the Caribbean, in terms of the economic impact when the price of oil, you know, goes sky high.
Yeah.
So KG mentioned something there that I was gonna mention later on as well. This concept of leapfrogging. So as you said just now, we should be moving away from the concept of using fossil fuels. But at the moment, technology isn't necessary. And this is where the connection with our lifestyle, how we live across the region now, can be impacted. Because this concept of leapfrogging may seem all well and good, but at the same time, the technologies aren't there yet, really. But what they seem to be saying to the region is, don't worry, don't develop it coming. By 2050, 2060, 2070, we're going to have what you need. So just hold on and carry on as is and don't worry about it
And
until
technology will
then.
catch up.
I
Is
wouldn't say
that
that
really
the
sustainable? That's the way how I look at it. I know it might be a bit simplistic, but that's the way how I feel as if they're telling us. Is
I
that
wouldn't say that the
sustainable really?
technology doesn't exist.
On a
So
wide front though, to be widely used, is it?
Well, it depends on what you're looking at. So for me, in terms of energy, that the technology exists for us to improve efficiency as well as to adopt systems that do not produce high levels of emissions. I know
Okay.
we kind of got into, none of our systems are without impacts. So even renewables
Okay,
produce
KG say
impacts,
technology's
you
there.
know?
Okay.
Even renewables produce waste, produce some level of
Yeah.
emissions, but in comparison to hydrocarbon-based systems, they are much more sustainable. So although in some areas, in terms of getting to net zero, some of the technology is still being developed, but there are things that we can do as a region to move us closer to that goal of becoming climate resilient. So I think
Okay.
that's where we should focus, you know.
Give me an example.
Resilient.
Give me something that we could do. And Christine, feel free to jump in. I see you nodding as well, so feel free to jump in.
Right. So an easy example is changing our energy systems from fossil fuel based to include a greater share of renewables, solar,
Okay.
wind, geothermal, hydro. We have those resources in the region, and that would allow us to, you know, liberate ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, reduce our carbon footprint, and even provide a reliable source of affordable energy to our populations. So that's one clear example that the region can pursue. Being mindful that that requires resources. And it brings me to the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015 and called for individual countries to commit to carbon emission reductions. They call it NDCs, nationally determined contributions, which was submitted. But a big part of that, especially for the developing world, was contingent on financing, which was supposed to come from the developed world to assist our transition.
What was it, like 600 million or something like that over the
100 billion per year, I think.
100 billion per year,
Right,
something like
yes.
that. Yeah.
And that essentially those financing mechanisms fell through. So on one hand, you're asking us to fulfill our commitments along with the rest of the world without providing that level of support that is needed for our small and fragile economies. So it just shows you how complex the issue of climate change and climate action, which is so urgently needed, how complex it is. But definitely, I think there are things that we can do, especially when we come together as a community.
Christine, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, definitely. Just to add on, I know that from the Guyana case, we are so up in arms about this oil and gas. But the thing is about Guyana, because we're compared to other Caribbean countries, we're very big. We have a lot of land, we have a lot of water, and there are other revenues of energy. So in the past, there were talks about hydro projects. There is opportunity for solar. There's opportunity for wind. The thing is about renewables, like all other forms of energy, there is negatives. There are disadvantages to each. But I think you have to weigh the costs and benefits, basically disadvantages and advantages, because we know that one source is not going to be enough. Can't rely on one source. And if we are going to talk about phasing out this old technology that there is so much resource and there's so much information on, then yes, we wouldn't be up to date to say like solar has all the answer or wind has all the answer. But I think in the Guyana situation, what's bothering a lot of citizens is the transparency of what's happening and what we think is happening, what the government know what's happening. I think there's a disconnect there, and I think there isn't clear understanding of the benefits that we will get from this old technology that we're now investing in, as opposed to investing in something that the entire world is moving towards, renewable energy. There are some projects, solar projects, and I think they're going to start up the hydro projects again and wind as well, but the emphasis is not on those industry at the moment. And I think that's something that citizens continue to question and activists continue to question. Why are we investing in this dying industry when we do have the opportunities and we have investors who are interested in these other sources?
Now, Guyana aside, because one could understand where Guyana is going, and why you're doing what you're doing, because oil is going to be around for quite some time still, and there is a possibility that you could maximize the benefits of what you've got and really not leapfrog in the sense of moving straight away from fossil fuels to dump other fossil fuels and moving across to something renewable, but there's a real energizing of the economy that can happen there in Guyana. So we talk about wind, we talk about renewables, you mentioned solar. Yes, all these things we have in abundance. But is that also highlighting something different, another aspect of this in the Caribbean, in a potential educational gap to develop our own way to maximize how to use these things? Because I saw even Prime Minister Monty was saying she was in Netherlands there right after COP, and they were going to buy 2 wind farms or something like that to come down into Barbados. And the question there for me is always, okay, so where's the technology transfer? The wind is ours, but now we're going to go buy the technology and the equipment from somewhere else. So where's and I think we endanger the sun there too in abundance. But and we had, over time, we had different projects and what's not. I remember in the university and different companies across the region that were taking advantage of the sun, solar dynamics, a whole bunch of other things as well. But a lot of that stuff seemed to have stagnated to the point where it don't feel as if we actually moved on that research, moved on that technology from an indigenous perspective. So are we in danger again of being recolonized for our resources? So therefore we become, we got the natural resources to use, but now we got to go and buy the technology to do it, and therefore there's another economic impact across the region.
Well, what I would say, I mean, clearly we have competent persons in the region, but I guess maybe you have to look at what the university is doing in terms of training as it relates to some of these skill sets. It might not even be university, it could be a polytechnic in terms of installation of some of these things. So yeah, but I mean, research and technology takes money. And for persons, especially research, I mean, to invest in research, it really takes a special type of investment. And if we're in a debt burden situation where we're really we're still tackling poverty, we're still tackling a whole host of other issues, crime and so on, I think it would be possibly difficult to maybe dive into some of the level of research and technology development that we want. So for example, as it relates to desalination in Barbados, that was an issue. I mean, clearly we brought in that technology and we have to bring in the expertise, but hopefully over time, at least with the expertise, we could transfer that knowledge. But clearly in terms of making some of the different parts of the equipment and so on, unless we do that at a regional level, in terms of economies of scale and all of that economic stuff, I don't know if it would be sustainable for us to.
But you say unless we do it at a regional level. But that's the answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it is the answer. But they may still, there may still be challenges there in terms of the technology. I don't know. But we all know that CARICOM. Let's not turn this into a CARICOM discussion. But yes, CARICOM possibly would be obviously it's a good space or a good framework for us to maybe tackle climate resilience. I think so. But we've been challenged in terms of working on a host of other stuff. But maybe this might be the time for us to maybe pull everything together as an opportunity window. Because, for example, food security, Christine mentioned Guyana, full of water and land. So Guyana should really be the breadbasket of the region. We could have, but it would mean shipping, which would mean using oil and fossil fuels. But still, it's a regional framework that I think we can maybe put things better in place. Yet the one other thing I would say in terms of carbon capture, Phil spoke about carbon capture and the technology as well. I mean, but I'm not sure, but I guess the tree, I guess we have the trees which capture carbon.
Yeah.
But in terms of setting up capture carbon technology, I will probably have to look into the figures for that. But clearly, our side of things is really adaptation. Carbon capture really looks at mitigation. And that is really trying to clean up what the developed world has done. So they may put a facility in the region, maybe. But I personally think we should be more focusing on adaptation as well as getting clean energy, of course. And that feeds into the whole financing discussion now, because a lot of the financing is really going to mitigation and not adaptation. Although I think they've doubled the adaptation funding now, I think, during this COP, I think. But that is another issue. And then what I further understand is a lot of the financing will be through loans. So that means clearly paying interest. So they're not going to be, they're going to have grants. They're going to have grants clearly, but I was surprised to hear that some of these things, maybe for the renewable energy, the mitigation side of things, they'll probably have a more loan structure. And hopefully on the adaptation side of things, it will probably be more of a grant structure. But yeah, so these are some of the, I guess some of the parts of the discussion we have to grapple with as well.
Deval, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, just to add to the conversation about around technology and development, the region has a history of importing technology. When it comes to renewables, in many cases, the technology is mature, the solar panels and the wind turbines.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a couple examples in the region of projects being implemented, and I think that has allowed the region to develop some level of capacity to continue developing these types of projects that we so urgently need. So definitely to support Kwame's point that at a regional level, we can definitely implement the things that need to be changed in terms of our systems. And even on my podcast, I make it a point to amplify what is happening in the region as it relates to climate change. And I'm very pleased to know that a lot of research and development, as well as implementation of actual projects, has been happening in the region. And the key to it is partnerships, and partnerships with the intention that it would facilitate knowledge transfer and capacity development, because we have many international partners that would come into the region, but we need to ensure that it allows for local content and development of our regional expertise and capacity. So it is a challenge, and there's always the risk of the full benefits not being derived by the people of the region. But there are some really good success stories throughout the region, and I think we just need to build momentum. Again, I guess it's good to mention that November is actually CARICOM Energy Month, which
Okay.
highlights,
Is it?
yes, the progress that has been made in the
See, we didn't
region.
even know that.
Yes, and actually, a solar project is going to be commissioned in Guyana in next month. That features producing 100% solar power to power a major building. So, things are happening. It's just that we're not aware of it. We're not having these
Yeah.
conversations. If you're in the environmental or the renewable
In the
space,
space.
you will know what's going on. But
You know.
it's important to me. It's important for the man on the street, the teacher, the fisherman, the taxi driver, to understand where we are, understand what's at stake, and understand what we can do to preserve lives and livelihoods.
So it's important for people like Kwame to be doing more live streams, is what you're saying.
I
There's
did,
obviously
I didn't interpret it that way, but I did.
I thought I did.
But
that's
just,
like
but,
No.
but just to pick up on Derval's point, though, maybe there's several disconnects because people on the ground are feeling the impacts. But I guess the disconnect is what is government doing, and I guess maybe that communication. So, right, government is doing a lot because clearly we ain't caught, we negotiating, we tired, and so on. But I guess that communication to what is happening on the ground, I think that is. But as I said, they are seeing it. 20 years ago they didn't see it, but now they're seeing it because the food price is going up because there's a drought or whatever happening in that ground space, whether indirectly or directly, is impacting people. I just wanted to follow up a point that KG made just now in highlighting the importance of trees.
Trees, yeah.
And I mean, the tree is really amazing, really amazing. But I want to highlight shade, the value of shade. And right now, you can see it. If there's one small tree in the middle of a space that you don't have any trees and the sun hot, everybody gravitates to that one tree. What is the value of that shade? And you know what we're doing now? We're cutting down trees to preserve utility lines. And I find that is a disconnect there, an interesting disconnect, because we don't want the hurricane to push down the tree on the line, and then we don't have electricity, but yet we're cutting down trees. So when you really study it, it's but at least a lot of these issues are coming to the fore now. People are starting to discuss it. Even the case of being vegetarian, that is a big, because when you ask people now,
Tried it for a year.
What are some of the things you're going to do at home? It's all well and good what you want government to do, and what you want business to do, and what you want the NGO to do. but what are you doing at home with you and your family? What are one or two steps that you're willing to do? And you know what is a big topical and controversial one? Vegetarian. And whether we want to or not, fine. But I just say that is one controversial, no pun intended, dining table topic that maybe everybody can start that discussion, plus other things, how we manage water at home, how we manage electricity, and so on. But interesting times.
That's for the kitchen, not the living room, Kwame.
Not for the living
So
exactly.
I think that's a really good point, because I am one of these that think, yes, there's a lot that individuals could be doing. However, I think in many cases, government's taking advantage of that through taxes and what's not, and not making some of the hard decisions that need to be made. And this is where, in my opinion, you have the impact of the disconnect, the impact of not communicating effectively. Now, in Barbados, I see they ban single-use plastics. To me, that's fantastic. Rather than tax me buying plastic, this, you don't need this. Get rid of this thing. And this is some of the issues even here in the UK, right? That they have it. At the supermarket, you got to pay 10B if you want a plastic bag to pack your food. In my opinion, you recognize that plastic is such a big issue. Ban the plastic bag. But they're not banning the plastic bag because there's some economic thing that's tied up in the economy and da. So is it always economy first? Economy
and votes.
Economy and votes first, and convenience, as well as people who have access to stop these decisions from being made. I mean, they said at COP they had so many guys from the Middle East there to sway how this thing was going to do, and the investors and the oil companies were at COP themselves too. A lot of people weren't talking about that, but just as many activists and just as many politicians, there were just as many lobbyists there to make sure that final decision get moved from phase out to phase down. All that kind of stuff, right? And I just find that that's really the impact of the disconnect. But I think there's some hard decisions that we as Caribbean governments need to make. And something like that is one of them. As a region, we should get rid of some of these single-use plastic right across the region, because we can't sustain in our landfills and what's not that kind of stuff, and the environment.
But we don't have a history of making hard decisions. That's the problem. We normally wait on somebody else to make the decision. Back in the day, it was probably you know who. And so I find that is an issue. I find here, like, we would rather ram a square peg through a circle than say, well, you know what, guys, this ain't making no sense. And there will be some in the population that will disagree, that are locked in and holding on. And that is maybe where the vote scenario comes in. Well, I cannot deny this particular set of people. So I can phase down as opposed to phase out. So, but yeah, we can turn around things with economic incentives quite easily.
Instead of always putting the burden on the population. And I think that's where the issue is right now. We keep sending up.
But we should tax bad things for sure, though. And maybe this is part of the phasing out. So as opposed to them saying, well, cold turkey stop. I mean, there's some sectors in the food. Well, there's some sectors in the food industry that I think still require some time to phase out plastic and so on. But I guess that's where you start taxing the bad things, but then removing taxes from the good things. So we shouldn't have tax on importing renewables and those, or anything that can save water in the household, or rainwater harvesting. We shouldn't have anything on those things. But then we flood the tax on bad food. We flood the tax on anything to do with messing up the environment. But taste and preference is another thing. I mean, what we locked into.
It's all well and good to ask me to give up meat, hamburgers, give up the plastic bag, but then I look over and I see you're giving approval to projects that require you to remove mangroves or remove forests. So I think yes, there is personal responsibility. That's a big part of it. But when we look at the impact of activities in the region, we really need systemic change that would integrate sustainability and climate resilience into all systems,
levels.
all sectors.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way for us to really tackle the climate crisis. We can't, I think coming back to where our conversation started in terms of, pointing fingers at the developed world, but we also have to, you know, there are fingers pointing back at us in terms of how we organize our economic systems and our society. If we're really serious about adaptation, mitigation, and as I mentioned, climate prosperity.
And just quickly, Phil. So one point that was made there, similar to what Durval was saying, is the technology. Child, the point just slipped straight out of my head. All right, Phil, you go ahead. It will come back.
No, come on, man. You had something there.
No, Phil, you go ahead. It will come
Maybe
back.
what I was going to say is going to help. I know we started off saying we're not looking at solutions. We're not expecting at the end of the show we have solutions. But what if we at least start to define some ideals? What would ideals look like in terms of lifestyle, in terms of housing, in terms of the way we do energy? And I'm talking about the Caribbean and regional context, in terms of utilities, in terms of curriculum and schooling, in terms of agriculture, in terms of transportation. What would be the ideals that we can start to aspire towards? And even if we don't get there, we're on a trajectory and a journey towards a set of ideals that we have defined. What are some of these things that world would look like?
Well, let me jump in there, Phil, and thank you very much for your 5C help, because you kind of helped me remember.
5C was our fifth form at high school.
Yeah, it kind of. So we spoke about money, and I heard a comment that it kind of looked bad. The developing countries just went to court, just looking for money to get maybe what is ideal. But as my prof would have highlighted, some of these things we can do without money in terms of your ideals now. No bill zones. It doesn't take any money to get no bill zones done.
You saying no bills or no bills?
No build. So we don't put.
I was getting excited.
Yeah. So we don't. Yeah, we don't put any houses maybe in certain areas that are vulnerable. I mean, it's controversial still because we're small islands, and some people can't pay for certain spaces to put their properties. But there are certain things we can do to create that ideal. And maybe that is what these countries are waiting for. They want us to put in these structures that Durval and Christine spoke about, so that then we'll remove the corruption that Christine spoke about, remove all of these things, and create that system so that they can start to push in the money. So maybe when, as Durval said, maybe when they start seeing us doing certain things now, we balling for the money, but yet we still have corrupt practices. We still putting people in areas because they're voting for certain. We filling up constituencies to get votes, but putting people in vulnerable spaces. So we're doing all of this, which is making us less resilient to climate, but yet we want money to do what with? Maybe buy some extra, I don't know, SUVs or something. But I'm just saying that. So there's
electric. You trying to get me take down, Kwame?
Yeah. There are ideals in terms of government and regulation and governance. There are ideals that we need to see on the ground as well, and in terms of business. So go ahead.
I was gonna say, while I agree with you on the local politics and policy side, where some of that stuff is concerned, and the relationship with the funds that some of the developed world have promised, I think that is us giving them an excuse. In many cases, I'm not saying what you're saying is not correct. In many instances of how we manage locally, but I ain't giving them that as no excuse on we need to put our house in order first before they do what they need to do to clean up.
It makes sense.
I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but I just ain't giving them that excuse.
Yeah, I disagree as well.
I'm not giving them the excuse. I'm just saying that is their perspective. And what I would say, though, I have seen it in the Caribbean. We ball for money. The money comes. Our house is not in order. and the money goes back. So
Agree. Yes.
I am just saying, fine, it is part of the story, and that shouldn't be an excuse for us getting it. But I don't think nothing is wrong with getting our house in order. It might take a long time, though.
Nothing ain't wrong with that. Exactly. Nothing ain't wrong with that. But that's kicking the can down the road as far as they're doing what they need to do and what they're supposed to do and what they promised.
Money properly, we need to get our house.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. Derval, you wanted to jump in there, or Christine?
Yeah, I was just going to say somebody's probably reporting your page right now.
Yeah, we had this call me last time too.
Problem. They invited me back.
Plan A. You still plan A.
We brought up the point of governance, and that is important too. But I am definitely not giving the developed world a free pass in terms of the commitments that they already made to assist the developing world, especially since they would have benefited from the extraction of resources in our region, for example. So we have to tackle this thing from all sides, all levels.
Yes.
So it might sound cliche, but we need a multi-pronged approach, as they like to say, to the climate crisis and to integrating sustainability in all our sectors. And coming back to Philip's point about what are the ideals, and I think it goes even beyond ideals. Some of the solutions already exist. Some of the solutions are outlined in our national policies, but the issue is implementation. And that's a challenge I think the region has struggled with. And we make progress in certain areas, but I think we need a focus on implementation, getting it off the paper and on the ground. And of course, that requires the support of the developed world for us to get there. But we have some of the capacity for sure. I have a very strong belief in us as Caribbean people in terms of our ability to solve our own problems. So we just, I don't know, I'm not sure what it is will take us over the edge, but I must say that there is some work that is being done across the region. We need to build momentum. We need to get more awareness out there. We need to get more hands on deck in terms of both at the individual level. If you want to stop eating meat, if you want to take your reusable bottle or reusable bag. But we also need all our systems to reflect that level of consciousness, as I say, or responsibility when it comes to the climate crisis.
No, I agree. Christine, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yes. I'm having some internet issues, so I'm not exactly sure what the question is. But I guess what I can gather from what Deval and Kwame said, something that Deval mentioned earlier, and I want to reiterate, is the whole concept of equity and equality. And I think our nations, we came out of colonization, so we have always been at a disadvantage. And then this issue of environmental justice is so important because even when we make decisions on a regional, a local level, there's still a lot of people that their voices are not included in these decision-making process. And we know that climate change is an intersectional issue. So it intersects with all other issues of justice. And I think if we are going to be Caribbean people and we're going to lead this movement, we have to understand the intersectionality of these issues with like gender justice and disability rights and all these other crosscuts, even like the mental health conversation. We have to like really understand the intersectionality of the issues and where we want to go in the future. The future is going to be completely different from what we're experiencing now. So we have to be forward thinking and we have to be innovative in the way we plan. And I do agree there is a lot of wisdom right here in the Caribbean that we can tap into. And yes, developed countries, they have benefit from us and they have a responsibility in assisting us in getting to be on this path to climate resiliency. And again, the Guyana context, we are a nation that's a climate sink. So we have enough trees that can assist us in this journey, but now we're tapping into this fossil fuel, conversation. And the other thing that I want to say is that we have to like understand as a Caribbean countries and as SIDS, we continue to develop because again we're so vulnerable to climate change impacts. We really have to like share lessons learned and like rely on each other because there's only so much of us and we've already seen the effects. I do agree that individual actions are really important, but then again, when we talk about the carbon footprint, recently I learned that whole concept of carbon footprint was that came out of the oil industry to kind of like put the blame on individuals. So that's another thing that I grapple with. I think about my impact on the earth almost every second, I would say, because I'm vegetarian. I wash my clothes, I hang it out in the sun, I reduce my energy usage, I do all of it, but at the end of the day, the fossil fuels company, they're still benefiting from the limited resources that we have on this earth.
Any other vegetarians in the house? I tried it for a year. It was good, but
just to say though, it's not necessarily just vegetarian, but just buying, which might be difficult for Barbados, but buying local stuff, so that nothing that necessarily needs to jump on a plane and come. But as I said, in the region, that's a little difficult because we're in island states. I mean, I could more do it so in Jamaica, I guess. Y'all can eat local more so in Guyana and so on. But I think as opposed to, right, that is one other. So for example, for us, we used to be buying a juice from South Africa. And I said, so that is one example. We stopped buying that juice. Those are little things, although we wanted to support our African colleagues, but those are some of these things, that small decisions you can make. And then the other thing I would say is, yes, as Durval said, we can make the personal responsibility, and when government wiping out wetlands and so on, yes, there needs to be a balance there. But I think that personal responsibility is still important for you to accept what is going on, for you to tap in, because some people just don't care for different reasons. They're distracted because of poverty and so on. Some people are distracted because they just like the life they're living. They like the big house and the big car, and that is their world. But I think for you to really get that perspective, you need to at least realize there is some personal responsibility, and then put pressure on your government if you can.
Someone asked, I think Mark Ray asked, what can grassroots organizations do? I know Deval and Christine, I know you guys in that space as well. What can you guys do? What can grassroots organizations do to help put pressure on the governments where policy is concerned, where climate change is concerned?
Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you. I think for me personally, I think building on the partnerships and building on the collaboration. So even as individuals, I always say that we all have a circle. And I think the idea of putting pressure on our government is so very important, because all developmental activities that's going to happen, they're building for the future. And I think sometimes they forget that they actually have to listen to citizens. So I think building on that grassroots, the force that you have, like connecting with other persons that are interested in the work that you're doing and putting pressure, attending these public forums that they may have and sharing opinions. And I do believe that local people, the wisdom that they have is really, really important and really necessary. And I think in this day and age, what we find, and I think even historically, these movements are so important for changes to happen. Like, we have to be people that are strong enough to like voice our opinions. And I know it's difficult in these little countries that we live in. We know that it's sometimes really scary decisions because everybody kind of know each other and people are scared to speak out and, say something that's against the whatever force that's in power. But I think we're living in a time that we don't have a choice, unfortunately. So we do have to like continue to build on the momentum and speak out as much as we can.
Deval, you wanted to jump in?
I would just add to what Christine said in terms of I think the grassroots movement has been doing the work for a long time. And I definitely have to commend persons who, have been deep in the trenches. I think the climate crisis and even environmental sustainability has sort of entered the mainstream and become a mainstream consideration. There's still a lot more to be done, but it's important for grassroots movement to continue the work to ensure that our development is inclusive so that we give consideration to all the various factors as opposed to just maybe the louder voices or the lobbyists. So I always encourage persons to get involved. We need more participation. We need to bring, the scientists, the researchers, the policymakers, and the educators, the students. We need to get everyone involved. And I think that's the role that the grassroots movement plays and assists with ensuring that our policies and our development strategies are inclusive and diverse.
Okay, I would just add to that. Well, firstly, big up Mark Ray, another for you see, man. Well, I would say for the grassroots, other than block the road, I would say clear.
You be following British news.
I would say, well, social media clearly is one broad area and interacting with the community, but also community management. So whether it be tree planting, forestry, in Jamaica, we had some instances of community management of water systems as well. So I think, yes, Matt. So I think, and as Derval pointed out, I think those bodies, the grassroots, are really more at the forefront because politicians and policymakers we're in the office, whereas grassroots are basically on the ground in the community, feeling the impacts and actually trying to implement solutions. So I think they are a very important part of the partnership moving forward, a critical component.
But even the grassroots movements, though, is it still a few people, or do you think it's many hands are joining in the grassroots movement? Because I think a lot of it still comes back to this conversation we be having, the disconnect in the conversation in understanding the real impact beyond hurricanes. Because it seemed to me that that's usually the conversation in hurricanes. And it's, don't get me wrong, I completely see it and it's absolutely right. But we don't necessarily see, but to help with that, even though we can, that's Mother Nature and other things happening around the world that's causing that. But for us to protect what we have, there's some things that we need to do and some decisions that we need to make. And I still feel that, yes, I hear you, Kwame, there's a lot of personal responsibility, 100% agree with that. But there are some big decisions and hard decisions that we need our policymakers to make on our behalf. That's why we put them there, to make the hard decisions and to look beyond the 5-year election cycle. And that just don't seem to be being done.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whenever I hear the word policy, I'm always like, because policy is sort of
say the right thing. Otherwise, say the right thing, Phil. Otherwise, we policy mag and jump in, forget wherever else he's doing and come in.
I know.
He's Mr. Policy, right?
But my view is always there's a world of policy and communications, and and speaking and dictating and governance and all that stuff. But the real thing that actually creates change and proper viral sustainable changes is behaviors, is commitment to behaviors. And you could say that's a bit of a policy specification of what non-negotiable behaviors look like. But sometimes when we get caught up in talking about policy, we take our eyes off of the reality of how we are living, what we need, what are our expectations, and what are our real concerns that we have as human beings living in the environment and off the environment. So I think I'd like to see, when I talk about ideals, and that was a question I posed, I was talking a lot more about behaviors right, than policy. Because in reality, behaviors don't always follow policy. Policy gets defined, and politicians go home and say, "I've done my job." But then, once policy is defined, there's then this work of how do you reward good behavior
with a policy.
Implementation. the implementation
Oh
gap.
yes, I love being rewarded with a policy. Oh yes, please give me 10
No,
policies.
but it would take some kind of a policy to reward your behavior. I
Yeah,
agree
how will
with
they
you.
know it's good behavior?
Exactly.
So yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I agree with you and Mark. Ray. Mark is another policy man, so he would know the thing. But I agree with you, and perhaps there's the over need or necessity or over emphasis on the word policy when a lot of it is behavioral and conversational and that kind of stuff. 100% I agree. But human beings, to me, we want comfort. We like where we is until we see that this thing can definitely affect me tomorrow. I carry on. You know, that's human nature.
Yeah, but there's a lot more to human nature than just that. Right?
No, but I just say on an average, that is going to be human nature.
We are
right?
creatures of imitation. We are pattern creatures.
100% agree.
For patterns. We look for creation. Policies don't mean that much to us, right? We believe they do.
Until they're implemented.
Exactly. Until they're implemented and there's some behavior that matches.
But if there's a policy by very nature, it means it's implemented.
No.
You can talk about policy, but if you don't,
exactly. No, a lot of policies are not. We have all.
You mean enforce?
Implemented and enforced.
And enforce. Yes, and enforce.
Policy is a design. It's a sort of concept.
It's a concept, and we have a lot of those.
A lot of key terms.
Policies are important.
Go ahead, Christine.
We in Guyana here, we have, you name it, we have a policy for everything. But it goes back to implementation, enforcement, and the awareness aspect. Like, I do a lot of domestic violence work because it's so connected to the environmental issues. And if you ask the regular person on the street there, they don't even know that we actually, like, abortion access actually, it's legal in Guyana. It's been legal since 1995. But that's the thing about policy. It's there, and a lot of work goes into making those policy. Like, a lot of activism goes into it, but that it doesn't end there. There is a lot more work that has to happen. And yeah, for the regular person on the street, they don't really care about a policy. They care about how it's affecting their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Agreed. Because the thing is, the policy can stay there and be stagnant. It's lifeless unless people believe in it.
Or until the government want to enforce it.
And it also depends. It also depends on how the policy was drafted and promulgated as well. I mean, if it wasn't a participatory approach, it wouldn't gather any traction versus somebody that just put together, Google the key terms on a desk in a government office and just put that together because the deadline was tomorrow. So it depends on how practical. But all policies, I guess, require some kind of implementation framework. And funding,
right?
And
so
human resources.
Agree.
Because I think in the Caribbean, one more point. I think in the Caribbean, some things we over policy and some things we can leave alone.
We like policy,
and then we cannot enforce it, we cannot regulate it, and then there's a big mess. So
something else has come along.
Let me clarify. I'm not saying do away with policy.
You like anarchy, Philip, man. I can hear it now. You're quiet.
No. My day
whatever
job
5C teach you is anarchy.
My day job is very much about structure and standards and organization and architectural specification. So I live in that world. But more and more I see you can't spend too much time and pretend that once this is fleshed out and designed and well specified, we've done our job. The work is really in the conversation and the behaviors, and allow that policy to be dynamic and change.
Yes,
right. Allow, if there's no learning, there's nothing. If you are not, if as human beings you're not learning and observing and adapting, and you have this policy that's static that you believe in, and you're just allowing that to define behaviors, we have lost.
Agree. Deval, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I just wanted to add, this very important conversation around policy making. I think the key is one, effective policy making, and as Philip mentioned, it has to be, alive to be able to respond to changes. But if we're really talking about systemic change, which would then lead to behavioral change, or it could work vice versa, I think it's important to have effective policies. But as Christine mentioned, you can't stop there.
Yes.
You have to move to implementation, to enforcement, and of course, awareness. So I think that's one of the areas, we said we mightn't arrive at solutions, but I think that is a clear area that we can address,
Yeah.
across the region that would, I think, bring us closer to our climate ambitions.
I agree. I agree 100% regarding awareness, and it's got to be living documents and willing to change and what's not. Because to me, the more I think about this conversation, even the more we have this conversation now, it's really about communication and people feeling connected to the issue. At the moment, we as a region, we don't feel connected to the issue until the next hurricane, or until the next viral video at COP. We just don't feel connected to it, and which is therefore not driving personal behaviors in some instances, is not driving participation in grassroots efforts and organizations, and therefore is not driving that pressure on those who has the power to create those policies and enforce to make those things real and a reality. So that seems to be a real issue that we have, and I don't think it's anything that's peculiar to the Caribbean. That would be 100%. I think it's the same. I think it's the same here in the UK. It's the same the world over, really, until something becomes real.
I agree with you, but I think in a small island developing state and
it should
region,
be more thing.
You feel it a lot more acutely.
Yes.
When it's not working.
Yes.
Right. So that's the big challenge we have.
Agreed.
So it's interesting you said that, Andre. So we're connected to the impacts, but we're not connected to the discussion. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah. We're not connected to the discussion.
But let's see though. Let's see what happens post COP. I mean, COP finished Sunday. I guess we will all feel the pulse. But yes, I mean, if there are other distractions, that is the problem here. If there are other distractions, like I trying to get food on my table, you're not going to tap into that discussion.
And I could be completely wrong on Wiggins next, but y'all would tell me in the Caribbean right now, beyond reports from extra-regional sources on the nightly news, have you seen any local conversations across media, social media on this very topic for the Caribbean at a relevant level? You might see one or two, but
besides this one.
Yeah, well, besides this one, that's why we lead in this thing, Philip. We global, but you might see on the evening news somewhere down the line, beyond where our prime ministers speak. But I'm sure after the first week, this get resorted to international news. 10 minutes down, a BBC report showing something, as opposed to our own journalists and stuff at COP. I don't know how many Caribbean journalists are at COP. I could be wrong.
I hope you're wrong.
You guys tell me. I don't know if you, Christine, you saw Guyanese media. Well, maybe you did because you had a big contingent there.
Tell him.
At COP or Trinidad or Jamaica. Y'all tell me. If I'm wrong, I would take it. Same tell me I am wrong.
Take it, man.
So for the first...
Go ahead, Christine.
For the first time this year, actually, we had two journalists, one from Guyana and one from Trinidad. They were part of this apprenticeship fellowship thing, the Climate Tracker. So they actually, I could send that information to you, actually. They were actually reporting on the COP from the Caribbean perspective. So they were there and they were bringing in back information here. I think because, I guess I'm speaking from a privileged place, because I'm involved in this climate conversation nonstop, I have had a number of discussions with young people around COP. And I've definitely, the previous year, it has been in the media more so. And I have seen a lot of regular people, they know what's happening, or at least they know our president is not in the country and they're just, at least they know that.
Exactly. Exactly. Deval, Trinidad?
I would say there has been an increased interest, but not the level that I think it requires. And like Christine, we are in this space, so it's kind of like preaching to the choir. We interacting with the persons that we know already have an interest in this. But in terms of the average citizen who's not connected directly, either through interest or work, I don't think, it really had a lasting impact. COP got its 10 minutes of news time, and then they kind of went on to the next big story. So I think I'm taking a wait and see approach. Just, COP just
But
ended.
that in itself is really telling, because all of our prime ministers and presidents in the case of Guyana were up there saying this 1.5 is crisis. We go die. We beaches gonna think we gonna flood away. But it got its 10 minutes of fame and then went away. There's the disconnect in full examples there. Because when you listen to Prime Minister Rowley, I listen to President Ali as well, listen to all the guys, Gaston Brown, everyone was sounding the alarm. Beyond a couple of videos that were mostly shared on their prime ministerial pages,
Right.
I ain't see much.
Well, you see, I think in the region, sad to say, we have so many other big problems that people are facing that although, the climate crisis is exacerbating many of those other problems, people are not seeing the direct link. And as you made the point, they're not connected to the issues. They're not seeing the direct connection to the issue, although they are experiencing it. So we have COVID, we have crime, we have poverty, we have loss of income, we have inflation. So I think people are maybe overwhelmed, and yes, climate change is there, but it's not at the forefront of the pressing issues that the average, Caribbean citizen might be concerned about.
Just quickly there, I guess the news, when you work at a news agency, I guess clearly what comes on as priorities, what is hitting you then and there. So for example, yes, I mean, the government and communication practitioners within the government and the environmental space have been putting out messaging and so on. In fact, part of the climate change advisory board for the minister, there is the head of CARIMAC, the communication department at Mona is part of that. So there is work being done. But what I would say is that clearly what is the topic of the day will have priority. So whereas they may have covered COP, but COP is not a hurricane, COP is not a drought, COP is not a flood. But what I'm trying to get at is where they might be the more discussed things when things happen. And things have been happening because, for example, farmers go from a drought to a flood.
The flooding in Trinidad recently.
Right, so things have been happening more regularly now. So it is in the news. But I would say it is only in the news if it is directly impacting, mainly if it's directly impacting the country in that particular time or period. What I would say though is a pet peeve of mine is that normally they put the weather news at the end of the news, the weather. And I think right now, maybe they should put the weather at the start of the news. Because, for example, sometimes, I turn off the TV a lot, the news here, because sometimes the news might not necessarily be the most pleasant. But you end up being tired by the end of news that you don't even know that maybe because they have sometimes a rain come and flood with the place. And I would say, boy, I never hear about that. But I didn't watch the weather. Because the weather at the end. So
that's good feedback.
Right. So maybe we need to change up. No, in this space of climate change, we need to give the weatherman a little bit more priority in terms of the news forecast.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, that goes back again to the disconnect, because if our major media isn't even, making it a priority, as far as what they're putting out there, but that again tells you more disconnect. I saw Trini Papers put more columns there talking about if Rowley was stuttering or if he looked good or what have you, and comparing it to Mia Motley, and the same thing in Jamaica and same thing in Antigua. And I see more column inches about that kind of nonsense than I actually see about the substance of what was being discussed and why it's impactful for us,
But it is there though. I would say it is there, but when it catches traction, it depends on how impactful things are happening on the ground.
I was just going to say at the beginning, we sort of said the climate, we talked about greenwashing and so on. We said the climate is being used as almost an excuse for a lot of things that are
sometimes
they're just bad behaviors. But maybe that could be a strategy. Maybe there is some sort of strategy there of weaving it into conversation so that it is at the forefront of people's knowledge that there is at some point a relationship or a connection to what you're experiencing to this bigger topic of climate change as well. So maybe it's not all.
You look hard to find that one, man. You're like, what? Man, they may look at excuses in some cases, but no, you're probably right there in some cases.
There's good and bad in everything.
There's good and bad in everything. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, but climate change impacts everything. So there's the connection. There is that connection that we can use, but we had a lot of these problems before climate change. So Barbados had problems with water before climate change. We had other issues before climate change. So climate change is just adding extra complexity. And a greater challenge to how things are going to be done.
I mean, before climate change was because the climate's.
Well, the climate, exactly. The climate has always 5C.
But he just helped you.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Of course. Yeah. Of course I know what you mean.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I think this is a really good discussion to have. And sometimes you need to have long form discussions as well to flesh out some of the issues and to just have a general chat about the kind of the things, So I thought this was really good. So that's really good. But Deval, one thing, you have a podcast as well. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so I host the Climate Conscious podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts and most podcast platforms. And the intention behind it is really to, like what we had today, to have conversations that amplify the voices of Caribbean and persons from small island developing states. Because I recognize that the climate conversation is dominated by what we call the global north or the developed nations. And in an effort to help make that connection between climate change, climate impacts, and our lives here in the Caribbean, we have conversations that span from, the science behind it, but more so a focus on action. What can we do to build resilience, to improve environmental sustainability from a small island developing state perspective?
Is it weekly, monthly? How often is it?
So new episodes are generally published every 2 weeks. We just wrapped up season 3. So look out for season 4 in 2022. Really? Yeah. Excellent. So you have to catch up on the past 3 seasons.
Yeah, we're gonna put the details we're gonna put the details on our page as well, guys. So look out for that. And Christine, tell us a little bit about the breadfruit tree.
Yes. The Bradford Collective. Yes.
Bradford tree. I think about home.
You could call it a Bradford tree. So the Bradford Collective, it's an emerging NGO here in Guyana that aims to work at the intersection of gender and environmental justice. So really what we care about is continuing to build partnership and speaking out about the issues and making sure that the issues that are being tackled is intersectional in its nature, because we know women and girls continue to be left out of this conversation. And one of the things that I'm really keen on is any development that happens has to take women, girls, and the environment into consideration. So speaking about having climate conversations and the importance of environmental education, we actually just completed a book for children, a storybook. And we actually just, finished it about a month ago. And it's intended to discuss the issues of climate change at the intersection of health. And specifically, we talked about flooding for children ages 9 and up. And so if you ever want to check it out, it's free to download on our website.
Oh, share us the link. We'll put it on our page as well. Get people.
Yeah, definitely. So we hope to do continue to do a lot more community engagement, community work, and the organization is a collective, meaning that anyone that has a project or an idea of something that they want to do at the intersection of gender and environment can get in touch, and yeah, we can collaborate and work on that. And one of the things we have happening this coming week actually is International Men's Day. So if you want to tune into the Bradford Collective, we actually have a discussion on mental health and men and mental health. The importance of that. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned there the impact of the climate change discussion on women. What kind of stuff are you seeing there? What's one of the major things that you see?
Yeah, so women, we continue to be considered the world's poor. And actually, when climate disasters happen, we are disproportionately affected by the impacts. And so we know worldwide women, we have less access to resources, for example, land. And we know in the Caribbean, we have extremely high domestic and intimate partner violence. And so when climate disasters happen, or when we're in a situation whereby our environment, or say, for example, with the COVID crisis, we know when we're in these extremely difficult circumstances, these social issues continue to be exacerbated. So we know that when we want to talk about climate change, we want to include women's perspective because they're half of the population. So they do add to our projects and policies, but they're also a vulnerable group that we have to take really conscious effort to involve.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. That's well done. Look, we'll share your details about your book and about your pages and develop your podcast as well on our page, guys. So look out for that as well on our page. Look, I really thought this was a really good conversation to have.
Yeah.
A really good discussion because, you know, as both of you said, especially with your work that you're doing, Deval, sometimes these conversations are happening out there. We're in them in some cases from our leaders' perspective, but as people, we don't even know the conversations that's happening. So I wanted, it fits well with We Global as well, to insert ourselves into these conversations and have them at a Caribbean level with the Caribbean nuance and the discussion in the Caribbean way in how we talk about these things. So it was really, really good to have that conversation. Yeah. But before we go, well, I can leave. I'm trying to see who to go first. Maybe we can let you go first. We can leave it to Deval to go last.
Plan A, man. Plan A.
Yeah, plan, because you was plan A from 5C. Climate change and the Caribbean, the crisis. What do you want to see us doing? At an individual level, macro level, how do you want to see us having this conversation?
Well, firstly, I want to say that I am extremely concerned about the future of the Caribbean. I think, one prof mentioned that I interact with that we will be starting to migrate closer to the poles. You know, that is where the discussion is as well, migration.
So you think before, I didn't want to interrupt you, but you think that it's so serious that we might be migrating off of our islands?
Well, based on what we're hearing and what we're seeing already, I see that as an adaptation strategy in my toolkit. It might not be immediate, but technically we may not have a space that is livable. Maybe in I don't know how long. I can't put the timeline. And we saw at COP that we're not taking this thing seriously. Temperatures change 1.1 already, as I said earlier, and we see the disruption. It's going to double to 2 point something based on what we're seeing here. So I am really, really concerned. And in terms of what to do, as we said, we mentioned the governance part, and that is pretty clear. We're seeing some things coming out of COP that we need to do. We need to reduce emissions, whether it be methane and so on. We need to improve on forestry. And then Derval spoke about energy efficiency as well. So we need to also reduce. So there are many things. It's a multi-pronged approach we need in many areas. But as Philip said, how do we get people on board, human behavior. And I think that is possibly the linchpin there. Because no matter, see, public awareness, no matter how much we tell people things, what changes people's minds? And I guess that is the trick. Maybe it is money. Maybe we need to put some financial incentives in there. Maybe morals on environmental morality may conquer some people. But we're seeing right now that nobody's doing anything much. So I just want to say multi-pronged. Everything has to come into the toolkit and everybody has to be there as well.
With you. Christine.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much once again for involving me in this. And what I think I saw somebody it was a comment and I resonated with it. It was this consciousness, this individual consciousness that we have to awaken with ourselves because we are living in a crisis. However, we can't go talking to people with fear-based approach. We can't use a fear-based approach because people are going to feel depressed and they're going to feel like they're not able to act. So I think what we have to understand is, yes, we're in a crisis, and yes, the climate change issue is something that, even though we may not know, the regular person in the street may not know the word climate change, they know that the earth is not operating the way they're used to it or the way they grew up expecting it to. There is changes that are happening to our climate. We can feel it in the heat wave, we can feel it in the droughts and then the extreme flooding that is happening. So I think what we have to do is like this, like continue having the conversation, continue to be intersectional in our approach. And I think as Caribbean people, we have the solutions. We have to understand that when we're developing, I think we have to like just turn that whole development, what we think development is, or like looking to the global north, with the development that they have achieved, that's not a development that we want because we see where that has gotten us. So I think we really have to understand and kind of like take apart that idea of development in a Caribbean context. Where do we want to see our countries and our islands in the next couple of years? And are we developing in a way that's sustainable, that's going to allow the future generation to have a livable planet and to enjoy the same Caribbean that we're so used to it? And again, we have a lot to offer in the Caribbean in terms of climate mitigation. But what I think is we have to continue to put pressure on the people that we elected to invest in projects and invest in an adaptation, and also to continue to, if they say they're going to do something, to keep their word. And I think there is a lot of pressure that we need to hold them to.
No, I agree 100% there. Deval, final word from you.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to the living room. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for coming.
And in reflecting on the climate crisis and the Caribbean, I hope to see a greater emphasis at all levels in building resilience. And that is the ability to anticipate. We know we're in a climate vulnerable region, so it should not catch us by surprise. So we anticipate those impacts and we prepare our systems, our personal systems, our communities, our national systems, our energy systems, prepare them to give ourselves a fighting chance in facing this climate crisis, right? So I hope to see more conversations that lead to action. I hope to see more policies being implemented.
implemented
and enforced.
And behavioral change.
And I hope to
behavioral
see
change, yes.
persons taking that personal responsibility and, that consciousness of the earth, the environment, the direct connection that we all have. And I think, we can improve our systems. We can, it might seem like doom and gloom, but there's hope. There's hope for us in the region.
Amazing.
Hope is always a good place to end.
Yeah.
Hope. There's always hope. There's always hope. Once we hear, there's always hope. But look, guys in the audience, I see you thanking you guys for coming by. So thank you so much for that. But Deval, Christine, Kwame, thank you so much for joining us in the living room and just participating with this conversation. Really important conversation that we as a region need to have. So thank you guys so much for taking the time and joining us this Sunday.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you for all you do.
No, thank you guys.
All the best.
Thanks, guys. Good conversation, Phil.
As expected. It was really...
I like that we come to a place that there's hope and we talk about behavioral change and the marrying a policy. But there's so much that has to do with us feeling connected to the issue. And if you don't feel connected to the issue, you're not going to feel connected to the solution.
Indeed. I think there's a connection to the issue, but I think that point of looking at defining what development means for us, I really take that to heart. I think that is so important, so really important, and probably the key to being connected. Because if you define a development that looks right for us and we start to really believe it, and we say this is the way we want to go, and then we look at the as is and recognize we're very far off of that, then we start get connected to the issue, and there's that excitement and energy towards going towards that new direction.
I agree. And it comes down again to that conversation that our leaders are having with us as a people. Because the grassroots stuff is great to get us energized, fantastic, has to happen. But the fact of the matter is there's a set of people there who can legislate, put things in place, enforce, and take us as a country in a direction as well. And you got to wonder, why is the conversation not being had at a very serious level to take us on that journey? Because what I 100% agree to, we don't need to follow the external view of what development is or path. The point is, though, we as a people are indoctrinated to a path. And to deviate from that path to one that fits with us, gonna take some change. And behavioral change, not just from a climate perspective, but from an expectancy, a lifestyle perspective. And to take a different path ain't going to happen unless that communication and understanding is there for everybody.
Well, that is true. We can't just depend on the heads of countries.
No.
We have to depend on the hearts of countries to beat. See what I did there, right?
I see you, man. I see you.
I think it is. But I do believe it. Although I think it is important that we actually feel it, because we can have things up here and think things and really say this is where we need to go. But if we don't feel it, if we don't really feel it and engage with it, it's not gonna.
It is not going to happen. And an attempt to take us on a different path could then wind up undoing a lot more than a climate strategy.
Yeah.
If the people aren't bought in to going on that journey and understanding what going on this journey means and how it's going to impact you personally. But look, that was a fantastic conversation. So a certain body missed this, and when we in policy, this would have been right at his street, right?
I saw him there. He was in the comments, man.
Man, he must see I want to jump in policy to talk in my thing. Policy.
He was in the comments.
I see him there in the comments, man. I see him there in the comments. He was itching. He was itching to divert the thing. But guys, Mark will be back next week. He just had some really important stuff that he had to deal with. But as usual, he'll be back next week. But it's been fantastic being with you all. I want to shout out a few people because I see so many comments going up. Mark Ray, saw you there in the comments. So they say you're a 5C man. Dennis, Adrian Lord, Eunice, Jennifer Nathan. Thank you. KG, saw loads of your comments there on YouTube. Thank you so much for those as well. Barbara Pyle, I see a whole Avril, who else in there? Carla. Dee, Bernadette, a whole bunch of people. I can't call everybody names, but tons of people in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us in the living room. Hit share. If you're new and you haven't already yet, subscribe to our page on Facebook, on YouTube, we're on Twitter, we're on IG as well. Just look for We Global or West Indians Global and you will find us there. But look, thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic weekend, rest of the weekend, and a fantastic week next week. You know, as we always say, until next time.
Be lean, be clean,
be clean,
be green.
be green.
Got it.
I like that.